We're now recording and we're going. We have 13 people, 13 attendees now, 14. So we're going to just wait a few minutes and give people a chance to come in. So just a few minutes and then we'll start the introductions.
And Brad, are you running a question box as well as the chat?
So I have a Q&A that's running, yes. So I'll be able to, field questions as they come in. And actually everybody will be able to see those.
Okay, so if you have any you want me to hit in particular, why don't you notify me in the chat? Otherwise, I'll just pull them out of there.
Okay. Sounds great. And we have 21 people, so we'll just give it another minute. And participants that are just joining, if you could go into the Q&A and just kind of let us know where you're coming in from, would be great, either by company, by state of mind, any of those things would be fine, just so we know you're there, B, just, kind of where you're at. That'd be great. And also you can hear us or see us. It'll also help us because we're not on the other end of that, obviously. Okay, Jorg, thank you. I saw that. Fantastic. Okay, beautiful. Gregory, great. Good job. I like it. It's great. Super. Q&A. Let's keep our questions over to the Q&A. Chat's good, but Q&A is helpful either way. Don, I see there from Arizona State University in the house. Fulton School of Engineering, great. Welcome aboard. Okay, we have 25. Let's try to get this up to like 30 and then we'll get going. We had about 75 or so people that came in. So Robert Fox, welcome.
Some of you are shy.
Many people are shy. Come on, we all know what to do here in Zoom. We'll have a lot of practice with it.
Too much?
A little bit of that. But also to be clear, the benefit of Zoom is we probably couldn't get all of these people together from all over the country to be able to do this without Zoom. So a benefit, and thank you all for your help and your participation, and your passion is clear about this topic and leaning in, and all the questions have been amazing. And thank you for all the confirmation, and I really, really appreciate it. Many groups I work with, you get dribs and drabs of information and it's just not great. Communication remains a massive challenge for all of us. You guys are really good at it. So thank you. Okay, it's 4:05. We have 26 people. I think we should get started. We'll have people that will join as we go. So first off, I'll just start because I'm speaking. My name is Brad Garston. I am one of the principals at Quanta Networks, and we lead the Chief Technology Officer Innovation Group at ACG Silicon Valley. And we're teaming up with ACG Los Angeles to do this event on space, the next internet frontier. So I'm going to be behind the scenes. Yvonne is from ACG Silicon Valley, and she's going to just give a quick snapshot of the organization. And then we're going to hand this over to Greg, and I'll do an introduction of Greg after Yvonne speaks.
Well, thank you, Brad, and welcome everybody. As Brad said, I'm Yvonne Schwab, ACG Silicon Valley CEO. Really excited to present you today's CTO Innovation Circle event space, the next internet. For those of you new to ACG Silicon Valley, we are the leading business-to-business networking organization in Silicon Valley, providing connections, thought leadership, and enabling personal and organizational growth. ACG Silicon Valley is offering a variety of virtual events in the next coming months as well. Tomorrow we have one of our favorites, the round robin with the ACG San Francisco chapter. We also have our e-lunch with all the California chapters next Wednesday. We have an IP asset management event coming up. And if you're interested in coming out and playing some golf, getting out and enjoying the California sun, please join us for the 22nd annual scholarship golf tournament on June 28th. And we have a bunch of more following. Please check out our website, acgsv.org, for more information. And before I forget, I want to make sure that I thank our sponsors. Of course, this event and the CTO Innovation Circle would not have been possible without our amazing sponsors, Quanta Networks, Squire Patent Box, and SVI Hub. So thank you so much, and I'll hand it back to Brad.
Super. Thank you so much for the overview. So Greg Autry is going to be kind of running the show today. So Greg is a clinical professor of space leadership, business, and policy in the Thunderbird School of Global Business at Arizona State University. So I'll let him do an additional introduction of himself. He's done some time at NASA, which I think is probably a super fun thing to do. So he'll speak about that. We'll do some introductions, and then we'll kind of get into the content. I thank you all for participating, and let me know if there's any questions through the Q&A. And we'll leave the chat, kind of as an internal resource. But if you're over there too, that's okay as well. So thank you so much, Greg.
All right. Well, thank you, Brad. Thank you, Yvonne, for putting this together. I'm really excited to have this conversation with some great folks from industry, and looking forward to the questions from the audience. I'm not going to waste a lot of time with my bio or half-page bios. If you looked at the website, we've got a pretty impressive group here, and what I want to do is hear what they have to say. So speaking of working at NASA and that fun time, let me start by introducing Charles Miller, who's the CEO of LINC, and who I had the joy of serving on the NASA transition team back in 2016, where I think notably we helped set the current direction of the NASA human exploration program to return to the moon, and got the agency a budget up a tick for the first time in a long time in real terms. And Charles is a storied and experienced commercial space entrepreneur. I'll let him take it away and share where he thinks we're going in the industry, and then we'll move through each of the speakers and get into the meat of the matter. Thank you, Charles.
All right. Thanks, Greg. Great to be here. Thanks to the ACG and Greg. Thanks for your interest in what LINC is doing. I've been a serial space entrepreneur for over 3 decades, participated in really 3 decades of breakthroughs. But the latest thing I'm doing, which is LINC, and you can check us out at www.link.world, is really the biggest breakthrough in my career. And what LINC is doing is we have figured out how to connect the mobile phone in your pocket everywhere through satellite. And in fact, you didn't know it, but the satellite phone in your pocket, the phone in your pocket is a satellite phone, and it can connect to a satellite passing over your head in low Earth orbit and stay connected everywhere. And so we figured out how to do that. We've actually launched 4 cell towers in space to date. We're launching our 5th one on the 25th of this month. And where we're the only company in the world that has done this. And we are starting commercial service next year to allow the phone in your pocket, again, no software change, no hardware change, in the phone in your pocket will turn into a satellite phone. And in the not too distant future, you'll stay connected everywhere. And our vision of the future is that no one ever again should die because they have a phone in their pocket that's not connected. And the future is broadband connectivity directly to your phone through satellite. So I'll just stop there and we can talk more about it.
That's exciting, Charles. I have to say, I think my mom and some folks have believed that their phones were talking to satellites rather than cell towers. But of course, when we get anywhere outside civilization, we find we disconnect. And even in places where we should be connected in civilization, we're not. So that could be a real game changer. And a lot of people don't realize that the mega constellations they hear about in the news from Starlink or Kuiper are looking at having fairly significant receiving antennas and ground stations that aren't exactly something you put in your pocket. So that's a game changer. Let me now go to Tom Vetto. Tom is a independent consultant now after some significant time in government. He was former Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, where he worked with the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, a topic I'm hoping we're going to hear more about, which is critical to investment in commercial space.
Hey, thanks, Greg. I'm happy to be here. And just a little bit about me. I graduated from the Naval Academy in 1990 with Vic Caruso, another panel, and I actually majored in astronautical engineering. And my final project was to design a vehicle for recovery of space debris. And I know that's something that is a big issue today as well. I did a small stint at Goddard Space Flight Center before starting nuclear power school and joining the submarine service. So I'm very interested in space, and after a long career in government and as a lawyer, I look forward to explaining how CFIUS can impact this innovation environment.
All right. Thank you, Tom. And we won't hold the lawyer part against you there. Next, I'd like to introduce Brian O'Toole, who's the CEO of Black Sky, a company that is launching a constellation of satellites that will give us high cadence and good resolution imaging of the world. Brian, tell us what your thoughts are.
Hi, Greg. Thank you very much. A real pleasure to be here, and thanks for putting this panel together. Hi, everybody. As Greg said, I'm Brian O'Toole. I'm the CEO of Black Sky. I've been in the geospatial intelligence and remote sensing industry now for way too long, over 30 years now. Started out as an engineer at GE Aerospace, building sensors, and got the entrepreneurial bug and had a serial set of successful startups in the industry. I eventually landed as the chief technology officer at GOI. GOI was one of the pioneering commercial satellite imaging companies in the industry. And now I have the privilege of leading Black Sky, which is really going to change the way we see and understand our planet. For those of you that are not familiar with Black Sky, we monitor and analyze activities around the world in real time from space. And to do this, we built an AI-enabled SaaS platform that's powered by a proprietary space network. And as Greg mentioned, it's a constellation of high-frequency Earth imaging satellites that provide an ability to look at things as they're happening in near real time. And this was all designed to deliver real-time information, analytics, and insights to customers around the world on demand. And so maybe, just stepping back for today's discussion, as I've been at this a while, I think as a perspective, I know we've all experienced the impact of web mapping services and GPS-enabled phones, vehicles, IoT sensors, et cetera, on our daily lives. And that's really becoming more and more every day. In fact, Google did a study a few years ago where 75% of the global GDP is impacted by geospatial technology in some form or another, and that's continued to grow, and is touching pretty much every industry. And more recently, massive new companies and industries have emerged on this technology. Think Uber and Lyft, Waze, Airbnb. Google Maps now powers 5 million websites, hundreds of millions of users. And all of this didn't exist a few years ago. But I believe we're really just at the beginning. And the industry's at an inflection point with the convergence of AI and machine learning capabilities, the emergence and viability of the new space economy, as we say, and we'll talk about today. GPS-enabled IoT and high-performance cloud computing, et cetera. This is all going to change this industry in ways I don't think we all understand or can imagine. So we're at Black Sky, we're really about capitalizing on these major trends to deliver real-time intelligence to customers around the world. And as they're happening, but in the future, understand changes and predict changes and how that might impact whole industries. So I think this is a really timely discussion, and really happy to be here and appreciate the opportunity.
All right, well, thank you, Brian. And I think, as you point out, it's not just about the satellites, it's about the software that makes that data accessible and will transform the world in so many ways. The things you can do with AI looking at these images will make industries from yard maintenance to energy look at the world in a different way. And there's actionable information for increasing efficiencies and increasing investment opportunities. Let me move on with Victor Caruso. Victor is the co-head of the aerospace and defense team at Duff & Phelps, where he works with M&A. Victor, what are your opening thoughts?
Yeah, so just very quickly, I'll start by saying I'm probably most excited to see that we've got some university students on here. My words of wisdom to you is don't blink. 30 years will go by very quickly. It's been a long time since Tom and I went through induction day at the Naval Academy together. Like Tom, I got an engineering degree. I flew for the U.S. Navy in the Pacific Theater, went to the Gulf. Following that, spent time as a senior engineer at Nortel Networks in Silicon Valley. And consistent with some of the other comments you've heard, things are changing very rapidly. I can't think of a better place for young professionals, engineering students, to think about placing their career. If you go back to the 90s when, you wanted to make a phone call and connected copper wire, that was Nortel and Lucent and Alcatel. Those companies basically don't exist anymore. Greg, consistent with your point, Internet Protocol, Cisco came along, and now what you find is it's all done in software. And so, following my engineering degree, went to UCLA, got an MBA, and then spent the last 25 years going down the mergers and acquisitions route, capital markets. And I think, Greg, just very quickly, consistent with all these fantastic companies that are being developed and all the technologies that are being described, you're going to start to see just an incredible amount of wealth creation, new companies being developed with novel technologies. I completely agree with the commentary that, space, unbeknownst to many people, is already a very, very big part of our life, and it's only going to continue. And from a capital market standpoint, initial public offerings, mergers and acquisitions, the pace of acceleration of companies acquiring other companies, going public, really is almost unprecedented. It probably goes back to the internet, if you will. So, we've got some CEOs on the line here, as you've heard, and the pace of activity for the younger professionals. Wow, button your chin straps. There's a lot going to happen in the very near term.
All right, thank you, Victor. Let me talk about the space world by starting out at the beginning point, essentially, which is launch. If we can't get assets into space, then we don't have assets in space that are generating data that we can then analyze and do the fantastic things we're talking about. We can't do the communications to Charles's satellites if they're not there. Charles Miller has been an advocate for low-cost access to space for a very long time. And I'd like to ask him, we're in this moment where I like to say we've got a Moore's law of space going. The cost of access to space per kilogram is dropping while the performance and reliability of the systems that get us there increase. And that's a really good place to be if you've got an application writing on top of that. Launch is kind of the microprocessor, perhaps, of the industry. Where do you see us going, Charles, with this dream of low-cost access to space finally seeming achievable?
Well, I thank you, Greg. I've been working on ultra low cost access to space, or in the 1990s, we called it cheap access to space. And the shuttle, if you recall, was originally supposed to be a fully reusable launch vehicle. So the vision for
Yeah, like
fully
$400 a pound or something to space, right? Wasn't
yeah,
that one?
it was always the vision. So it's like technology's caught up, innovation's caught up, the American entrepreneur has caught up, and like this is bringing this into existence. We're watching it. It seems after so long, so fast, it's happening between SpaceX with their partially reusable launch vehicle, and now they're doing Starship, and Jeff Bezos with New Glenn. And then you have a bunch of other companies. Relativity has just raised $1.15 billion to do a fully reusable version of there. And you have, so there's just a bunch of, and there's others. And so we are about to see the biggest breakthrough in space that you've ever seen. It's a big, it really is bigger than the moon landing, fully reusable launch vehicles. And what we're going to see is we're going to go from launches per month to launches per day. And we're going to see at least an order of magnitude reduction in the cost of getting to orbit. And what is going to happen is so many things that were expensive to experiment with, you're just going to do it. And the pace of innovation in space is going to go up very rapidly. And there's a ton of ideas that have been out there waiting to be developed and created, that very bright people, that just the timing was wrong. And so you're going to see on-orbit assembly of massive telescopes that you've never seen before. You're going to see lots of people, not just that do these suborbital hops, but a lot more people are going to be going to space. You're going to see private commercial space stations. You're going to see private trips to the moon, I predict, in the next decade, where, instead of taking a trip to low Earth orbit, you take a trip to land on the moon. And so that is with these vehicles is in the realm of possibility. So you're going to see, for Link, you're going to have broadband everywhere directly to your phone, no matter where you are, from the deepest desert to the middle of Pacific, as your phone is going to stay connected everywhere with the fastest speeds. And so this has implications for Brian's company, when you can put up, massive amounts of remote sensing satellites. It just changes everything. And it really is, you're going to see the space industry growing into $1 trillion a year plus industry. So it is a huge opportunity to get in now, and it's a huge growth area. And for the college students, an amazing time to get into the space industry.
Yeah, Charles, I have to say, you mentioned assembling telescopes in space. I remember you and I looking at the black hole that James Webb Space Telescope had discovered inside the NASA budget, and before it even launched, right? And
Right.
if we could have built that thing, as an assembly, instead of being terrified with the fact that it may or may not unfold when it gets 1 million miles away from Earth, it would be a lot more comfortable.
So that's the James Webb Space Telescope. It's the last time we're going to spend $10 billion on a telescope. Today, with cheap access to space that's coming, and on-orbit assembly that you can do with like the DARPA RSGS program and other robotics, it's going to be IKEA in space. You're going to build telescopes that put James Webb to shame for 1/10 of the cost. It's just an amazing revolution in astronomy is coming with space, the coming space telescopes.
So Brian,
and Charles, I was just gonna mention quickly on that. I mean, check me on this, right? That the cost of satellites has gone from hundreds of millions to tens of millions to now single millions for small sats, and in some cases even hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? I mean,
Well, our
just to give
satellites
people
cost hundreds of thousands, so we are down there, with well below $1 million for the marginal cost to build a satellite, if you know what you're doing.
yeah, super important point, Victor. Brian, let me ask you: has the cost of launch dropping and the reliability and timing of it getting better changed your business plan, or is that something you built in from the beginning when you thought about where Black Sky was going, and where do you see that going in the future? And also, to Victor's points, the cost of satellite assembly, has that been a benefit to you, or did you kind of build this trend into your model?
Well, we built the trend into the model really because we're changing the model. And, we're building satellites that we can basically evolve on the production line over time, an agile space approach. We're also launching a constellation of 30 of these. So we need affordable and reliable access to space. And we also need to go where we want to go, when we want to go. And, you go back 10 years ago where the industry was basically you booked a rocket 5 years ahead of time. When you launched a big satellite, now we're booking months ahead of time through multiple providers. And we can now control the rate at which we launch satellites, where they go. Ours are in unique orbits. So we took a lot of advantage of rideshare. Was also a big innovation in the last several years that got a lot of these small satellites into orbit, but now there's dedicated launch vehicles that are affordable. So to me, that's a massively retired risk in the last 3 years around the business plan, and is a fundamental element of our strategy, which is focused on really the data and information. So, and evolving the types of sensors that we're going to put on orbit, and then how we get that down and use it. So this was a big barrier, and now it's really been torn down. And I agree, the costs are going to continue to come down, and that's going to enable a whole world of new innovation.
So I think it's really critical for the audience, if anybody's not familiar with the space business, to realize that we're talking about a situation where launches that were dedicated used to cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Were planned 2 years in advance, and you would expect a 10% failure rate and insure against that, right? Today, we're looking at responsive launches that could come down into the $10 million or even less at some point for small satellites. They can be planned months in advance, and the failure rate's getting closer to zero. That's a pretty exciting place to be. I'd like to ask Tom, this responsive launch capability is something industry is very excited about. It's also something, of course, that has significant implications for national security. How does that impact what you see going around CFIUS, particularly when we've got a lot of small launch companies receiving potentially foreign investment and or customers and partnerships that are relatively complex? What's going on there?
So thanks, Greg. I'll just real quick for folks who don't know, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States has been around for about 40 years, and it's perhaps one of the most powerful government agencies that most people haven't heard of. It's able to tear apart a merger or acquisition, and it screens foreign capital for national security risk. And it's essentially a mini national security council staffed by cabinet level agencies and the intelligence community. And while largely voluntary, it's able to grab transactions post-closing and bring them in for review. What I would say, Vic mentioned button your chin straps. This industrial revolution in space is happening against the backdrop of perhaps the most consequential great power competition in history. And so with that as the backdrop, the U.S. government is very concerned about compromise or misappropriation of critical technology, about access to critical infrastructure, and access to sensitive data. And as I hear Charles and Brian and Vic and you talk, all of those areas, data, infrastructure, technology, innovation, those all are areas in the space sector that CFIUS and the government are going to be closely looking at. And in terms of why does it matter, I'll give you a couple of numbers: 117 billion and 35 million. 117 billion is the Qualcomm Broadcom merger that was scuttled by the committee for national security reasons. 35 million is an investment by a Chinese company in a data software company in 2020 for hotel stays. And so my point in those two numbers, 117 billion and 35 million. The committee is not focused on the scope or the size of the investment. What they're really focused on is the underlying technology that could be compromised, or the infrastructure that could be compromised. And so that's why I think that this is really important to the backdrop of the larger discussion.
Great. I'd like to share my screen reel here quick here and point out the fact that you've got projections from mainstream investment houses and analysts predicting, first from Morgan Stanley, that the space industry will triple to 1.1 trillion by 2040. And then if you pop over and you look at what Bank of America Merrill Lynch has said, they're looking at 2.7 trillion. And to put that in perspective, that is the size of the UK economy, or about twice the size of the Russian economy. That's really going to happen. We are going to see space be a domain that puts it on the par with the internet business. And as the title for this panel was noting, that this is the next internet. And by that, we don't just mean communicating through Charles's network or one of the other LEO communication systems, but this is the investment point of the future. So Victor, I'm curious from your point of view, the M&A activity you see going on within the context of all this change and the concerns that we've heard from Tom. Fill us in there.
Yeah, so the aerospace defense government mergers and acquisitions world, ADG M&A, if you will, by number of transactions is about 500 M&A deals a year. It's been climbing every year. This year is going to be a banner year because of a likely change in tax policy. Space has traditionally been a cottage industry, but over the last 5 years, it's gone from about 15 M&A transactions now up to probably around 30 this year, somewhere in that zip code. You've had 7 what are called SPACs, IPOs, initial public offerings. People are familiar with that term. There's another way to do an IPO through a special purpose acquisition company. And so from a capital market standpoint, whether you do an M&A transaction, whether it's a financing, whether it's an IPO, I mean, all of the things that you're saying, Greg, in terms of, from an institutional investor standpoint, and I spent time as a private equity professional as well, the institutional capital folks across all of the various early stage, mid stage, late stage, public, private, they are throwing capital towards companies that are focused on space in a way that I've not seen since the early days of the internet. To say that the capital markets are focused and on fire, looking for investment opportunities in space is an understatement for sure.
I've seen that myself. Now, one of the questions that comes up with all this activity in space, all the launch capability and the constellations we're talking about from Link, Black Sky, and other much larger constellations, is this question of space debris. And I think the public has a perception that this is just now becoming a problem. I'd like to say, before I hand it off to the experts here, that this has been a real problem for a while, and it's not a problem that these commercial companies created. These commercial companies are much more likely, in my humble opinion, to do the right thing by their satellites and provide deorbiting mechanisms, or put them in orbits that are so low that they'll deorbit fairly routinely and fairly quickly on their own and not contribute to the space debris problem. The space debris problem was caused by governments, notably the governments of China, the United States, and Soviet Union, Russia over the years. And I think it's incumbent upon them to fund the cleanup of that. I'm very resistive. Sometimes when I hear people say there should be a tax on commercial launches to clean up the space debris, they didn't make it. It's an environment they have to live in. That said, there are complexities. Tom, what are your thoughts on that?
I'll have to defer to others on the space debris.
Okay.
Other than to say that I agree with you that those who make the mess ought to be responsible for cleaning it up.
So let me ask you, Charles, what are your thoughts on the actual state of the space debris problem, and what should be done about the existing stuff, what we do to not contribute further?
Right. Well, I did a 3-year tour at NASA as senior advisor for commercial space, and I actually recommended NASA senior leadership that we stand up an office to solve this problem. That was a decade ago, and the problem is now getting really bad. It's on the verge of being, huge destruction in low Earth orbit. There are rather straightforward things that we could do now to solve it. One is get the Department of Commerce, Office of Space Commerce organized and give authority to be the space situational, space traffic control, is the simplest way to describe it. But to take this seriously, we also need to
If I might
update.
interject there, Charles, I want to be clear to the audience that this is an idea that Charles put forward. I put forward, other folks put forward. It resulted in executive orders from the White House in the last administration and support from Scott Pace, the National Space Council. Congress didn't fund the office fully and do what needed to be done to actually make it happen. And there was a little bit of interagency argument, but it needs to happen. And if you're an advocate in space, this is probably the most important thing out there. Charles, go ahead.
It's also the orbital debris rules that the international community of all responsible space powers, and it's in everybody's interest. It's not just Western powers, but China and Russia also have a huge stake in the destruction of low Earth orbit. And there's what's called the runaway Kessler effect. That once you get a collision causes debris, which then causes more debris, collisions and debris, and it just get a runaway effect, and it just really destroys low Earth orbit, and it hurts everybody on the planet. And so we need an update of the rules. It's a complex issue that's really needs, you can actually do some things with some unintended consequences that don't help solve the problem. And so Link actually submitted very detailed comments on this subject last fall to the FCC, and the US government and our international partners and other space powers need to take this seriously. There's also some things we can do to help clean up the old debris. I agree, we shouldn't be taxing industry to pay for all the debris that's been littered in space by all the different governments. The government should fund that. And there's when I was at NASA, I recommended some pathways to some breakthrough technologies that actually could affordably clean up debris if once you develop and demonstrate the technology. The key issue is we know how to grab something and deorbit it. It's just horrendously expensive with the current methods, but there are some pathways that can clean up the worst debris. The worst debris is actually what's called Soviet Union Zenit second stage rocket stages that are the size of buses that are just in orbit and are huge targets and a huge amount of mass. And so you can get, if you target the top 10% of the orbital debris in orbit, you can, and deorbit it, you can get rid of the large majority of the risk. But there's a smart way forward once the government decides it's serious. And so there's a way to solve this. It's just takes serious people.
Brian is an operator of a constellation out there. Would you like to comment on your thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, I think it's been a problem for a long time. Going back to some of the bigger satellites at companies that I operated, we had to move them out of the way every now and then. And so it's a serious problem, and I think it does need to be addressed. I don't agree that industry needs to bear the whole thing of this, but I do believe we all should be responsible for what we're putting up there and how we manage it.
Yeah, I think playing off what Brian said, industry shouldn't be paying for what the litter that's in the street that people have strewn up there for the last 50 years. But we need better rules to say, going forward, industry shouldn't be throwing more debris in the streets, right? The industry should deorbit their satellites at the end of life and have better practices on minimizing the amount of orbital debris. And we also need to reform our assessment of risk. It's not just the probability that your satellite will get hit, it's the consequence if it does get hit. If big satellites and big rocket upper stages have a lot more risk and NASA knows this well. Anybody does real, like the Navy does real risk assessment, right? It's the probability of the risk times the consequence of the risk. And so large spacecraft go up in geometrically in risk. They both have a much larger surface area to get hit, and they have a lot more mass. So it goes up as a geometric progression to the size of the spacecraft squared in the amount of risk you're creating. And then there's certain orbits that are really bad orbits. So you shouldn't be going up like in low Earth orbit above 700 kilometers or even 650. And where there's a lot more debris and a lot more chance of getting hit. So Link, for example, is intentionally designing our spacecraft, one, to be smaller, and second, we're lowering the orbit below, down to 500 kilometers or lower, what we call a self-cleaning orbit. And if a satellite dies there, it deorbits in 5 years or less. It's actually much lower risk to be there. So a number of things that Link is doing is designing to minimize orbital debris risk, because we're going to build a lot of satellites. We're planning on, we've announced, upwards of 5,000 satellites. So we've already done detailed assessments with NASA and the Space Force of showing how we are lowering risk and have a very system level approach to minimize risk. You can find a detailed blog post by me on this on our website, but it is a critical problem because one bad actor can mess it up for everybody.
Yeah, and let's be clear, some of this stuff isn't even accidental. There were ASAT tests from the major powers in the past, and notably the Chinese ASAT test in 2007 created pretty much the biggest annoying debris cloud up there. The International Space Station has to move practically every year to avoid that material, and it's a risk to commercial as well as lives in space. This is a activity we can no longer tolerate.
Sometimes they can avoid it. It got hit about a month ago.
We don't know by what, but yeah, absolutely. Another question that comes up is privacy. And that was a question that was asked also in the Q&A there. There's a balance between security and privacy, monitoring and analyzing data. Brian, can you talk to us about how companies like yours that are providing a lot of data can make sure that this isn't a personal privacy issue, and what the concerns around that have been?
Yeah, it's a great question. First off, our company does not track people. We don't keep databases on people. We're all about monitoring economic activity. So this is the resolution of our satellites are currently 1 meter, and they'll go down to 50 centimeters here in the coming years. So that's about the size of home plate. But we're more about looking at economic activity, looking at ships, aircraft, trucks, commodities from space, mining activities, and things of that nature. And it's about providing this as business intelligence for enterprises in the energy sector, insurance sector, and things of that nature. So that's how we're looking at this. It's not about that. We wouldn't provide that data on that type of tracking anyways, because we're focused on the business intelligence side of the market.
Great. And speaking of the market, how large do you see it? How do you see the total addressable market growing for imaging, for communications broadly?
Well, I'll speak to the industry overall is just massive. When I look at the market for data and analytics, the geospatial industry, that's growing, north. Today, it's about 13 billion, growing to 40 to plus billion over the next 5 years. And what's driving that are really 3 to 4, I think, major secular trends. On the government side, there's a major shift of investment into tactical ISR from space. So that's beginning to use small satellite constellations in theater. to support the warfighter and what has traditionally been used or been things like drones and other capabilities have been used for that. And so we're seeing a tremendous, that's behind the stand up of the Space Force and some of these other things that are going on. And so I'm seeing that both in the US and internationally. The other, and probably the biggest driver, is the need to integrate geospatial intelligence for business intelligence. And this is across many different industries, and it's beyond today, which is primarily static mapping and map layers and analytics, to real-time information about what's happening around the world as it's happening to inform business decisions. And that's probably the biggest and fastest growing part of the market. And then I think the third area that we're going to see, and this goes back to mapping, is Google Maps and other kind of mapping services are fairly static, right? They're primarily base maps. The frequency that they get updated is fairly low, and actually you can't actually get access to the data for making business decisions. It's a context and used for routing applications. So I'm seeing where moving to real-time mapping updates around real-time mapping services is going to be another major trend. I think ultimately what all three of these things mean is there's just a growing demand for real-time information about what's going on and what's changing. And I think that's where, Greg, to your, really the premise for this discussion is really about all the things that we can do with sensors in space that we weren't able to do before, that it's going to drive these types of real-time insights that are going to touch the government sector and the business sector, and eventually affect real-time mapping that's used for all kinds of commercial applications.
Sure. One of the applications that's come to my attention that I don't think a lot of people are aware of is you've got folks operating oil pipelines, for instance, or other pipelines, and they, in the United States, have airplanes that are flying up and down those pipelines every day, just looking to monitor and see if there's a leak in that pipeline that they can observe. And in some countries in the world, they have human beings walking these pipelines physically to look for that. We're going to be able to detect that with an image from space in near real time and have AI analyze it, alert it to somebody. That's a commercial good, an economic good, and an environmental good, all combined right there in an industry that nobody really thinks is being related to space.
Well, Greg, let me just add to that, right? I think accessibility and affordability has been a really big barrier in the past to, I think, major market growth. Typically only big governments or big enterprises like Google or Apple that are building mapping applications could afford this stuff. But to your point on facility monitoring for security or pipeline monitoring, for example, that can be done through a SaaS subscription model at low cost that's lower than what the traditional methods have been used before. And it's putting the power of that capability in the hands of the users that need it, and not going through a very complex, I'll say, antiquated approach right now, which is relying on analysts to go get this data, put it into a format that can be digested by someone wanting to actually do the business intelligence. So I think that's a significant part of the innovation that's going to drive, back to your question on market growth, is cost and ease of use and accessibility through modern software.
Okay, great. Victor, I've got a question here that I think might be interesting for you. Somebody's asked, what is the most critical thing that we learned from the development of internet capabilities that we can apply to the commercial development of space? And they're saying, what do you think will be the next Amazon or Apple in space? When you look at the investment in M&A going out there, you want to take a guess at that and give us a good bet?
Yeah. Look, I think I'll start by kind of focusing on the dollars, right? Because ultimately, businesses are in, they're in it to make a profit and make money, right? So just to kind of size things, right? So European Space Agency's budget about $6.5 billion, NASA $25 billion. Brian, you've talked about some numbers. You've heard the whole space market's about $1 trillion. And I think so now to directly answer the question, the U.S. defense budget, as an example, is about $750 billion, right? So we're talking about a marketplace that's north of $1 trillion. It's big, right? So lots of opportunities, tons of different applications. And to me, I think what's most interesting about it, and we've got some of the right people on the phone, is it used to be that when you put a satellite up, it was primarily done in hardware. And now everything is shifting towards software. And what software does for you is you not only launch it, but now you can upgrade it. You can change the dynamics of whatever it is you put up there, right? So I actually think that where you're going to see some of the most innovation is through software in what's being put in space across many different applications: Earth observation, communications, national security applications, right? And so to me, I think where the real innovations and business models are going to be moving at light speed are going to be software-based business models that have application in space. That's my personal opinion.
Let me add to that. Link's key innovations for what we're doing with cell towers in space is in software. It's in the software layer to make a satellite look like a standard vanilla, cell tower to your phone. It tricks your phone into doing that, and it's all in software. And let me add to this. Of the $1 trillion year economy in space, what Link is doing with extending cell coverage everywhere, that is just on its own is a $400 billion a year opportunity. And think of it this way: there's over 5 billion people with mobile phones in their pocket today. We're going to allow them to stay connected everywhere. And our data is that any point in time, about 15% of mobile phone users are disconnected on average around the world. It's less in developed countries, more in emerging countries, but the average is 750 million people. And our data is also that over 50% of those 5 billion people have a period of extended disconnectivity sometime in a year. So it's a huge market. We're talking billions of people that Link is solving a problem for. And we actually see ourselves as, while we're a space company, we're also an extension of the mobile wireless industry, which is itself $1 trillion a year industry. So taking 5 billion users, and there's another billion, 1.2 users who would get a mobile phone, if they had affordable connectivity where they live and work today, and they don't. And so this really is a huge opportunity that, and communications is right now in the existing industry is actually the biggest, most profitable part of the industry. And it's where, if you think about it, since a satellite is only shooting electrons to connect to devices, the marginal cost is effectively zero. So it's got a lot of the same features as like software. And you could think of, if you look at Intelsat or Eutelsat or as economics or SES or Viasat, they got very high fixed costs, but they have virtually zero marginal cost. And Link's in the same category. It very much looks like software as a service economics with some, higher CapEx. But once you get the CapEx and you cover your fixed costs, basically every dollar of extra revenue falls to the bottom line. So it's a really profitable area of business and industry. Once you can get the business going.
I could just Victor's comment. Our company, we have about 150 people. 90 to 100 of them are software engineers and data scientists. So I like to say we're more of a software and data analytics company that happens to own some satellites. And there's just a massive amount of software in our satellites and the systems that we operate. But my view, it's all about the insights and analytics and how to make this accessible to customers any way they want it. And that's going to come through software, and it's going to come through AI and machine learning and deriving the insights out of this. So I agree with Victor. The software element of this software-enabled space is really going to be transformative.
Right. I've got a question here from Sandra Irwin for Tom. She's wondering whether CFIUS reviews are only for foreign investments in the space industry where U.S. government activities are concerned, or does it also apply to purely commercial operators in purely commercial markets? And if you can give us some specific example, I think that'd be great.
Sure. So it's any U.S. business that receives foreign capital ostensibly could be subject to jurisdiction. So it could be the traditional merger and acquisition. It could be a venture capital investment in a private sector company that has nothing to do with the government. Certainly, government contracts are relevant to assessing national security risk, but it's really about, at least right now, as the concept of national security evolves, it's about about compromise or misappropriation of cutting edge innovation, again, access to infrastructure and the access to data and data integrity and supply chain integrity. All of those are the sorts of risks that the committee considers and looks at. And so all you need is a foreign source of capital into a U.S. company, and you're potentially in jurisdiction. I think one of the most recent examples may be in the space context. Just this past May, Hanwha, a South Korean company, invested $30 million into this was in the media, I'm not disclosing anything confidential, into a company I believe called Kaimida that makes space antennas for low Earth orbit. And it cleared the committee's review. And so that's one example, strictly commercial in context.
We have seen things, just so the audience knows, that are kind of tricky. A couple of years ago, there was a circumstance where a commercial satellite company found out to its surprise that board members that had brought in and investors that had brought in through banks in the British Virgin Islands were actually controlled by the Chinese government. And they ended up with a majority of their board being essentially agents for the Chinese Communist Party and an American commercial satellite firm. They had no idea until this occurred. It got Boeing, who they were working with, into some hot water at the time. How does CFIUS help us avoid these sort of things?
Well, so CFIUS, I wouldn't necessarily say the government is helping, but I mean, one way it'll help is in the course of a review. If a deal is filed with the committee pre-closing, the committee will look at the deal, ask a series of questions, and attempt to quantify risk. And then if it identifies risk, it'll work with the transaction parties to actually develop conditions for what's called a national security agreement to mitigate that risk and to continue to have oversight over the deal post-closing. And that may be controls on intellectual property. It may be controls on access. It may be restrictions on board membership or certain board observers' access to information and audit rights. And they can actually get pretty onerous in terms of the scope of the mitigation. And so then it really becomes a cost-benefit analysis by the transaction parties on whether or not it makes sense to continue the deal with those sorts of requirements on it. I would say that's one way the committee helps, is to, it's not a black and white, clear, no clear. If they identify risk, the committee's required under the law to attempt to consider mitigation that would eliminate that risk, short of prohibition or unwinding.
And I would also note that we have just a little bit of time left. We're going to do a 30-minute Q&A after this, but there's more than just CFIUS involved in these national security issues. Recently, Momentous, a very interesting company with a kind of space tug upper stage system that a lot of people are excited about technically has had complexities involving its Russian founder and investments there. And most recently, FAA denied them a launch permit, and that appears to be based on national security rather than functional issues involving their system. Anybody want to comment on where we are with that? And I see
I'll just interject and say that also, from what I read in the press, involves a CFIUS review where there may be the companies attempting to be proactive with the committee in terms of offering potential mitigation to keep the SPAC on time and on track, including potential replacement of the CEO and requiring U.S. citizens to vote certain shares in place of foreign shareholders. So, that's what I've seen in the press. More to follow on how that all shakes out.
All right. Well, Brad,
Yeah,
you want to interject here?
Greg, I was just going to add, I mean, again, kind of looking at this from a national security standpoint, just very quickly, I mean, in case people aren't paying attention, one of the things that's probably among the more concerning things to me is, at the nation state level, we talked about space debris, but at the nation state level, meaning China, Russia, India, Japan, the US, the European Union, there is a nation state race to space, if you will, to, plant the flag, establish, kind of their presence, all of the, resources and, and not just hard resources, bandwidth and all the rest of it that comes with it, that I think is unprecedented in our lifetime. And, it has the potential to leave a path of destruction that, maybe looks something like, the colonization that took place hundreds of years ago. So in case people aren't paying attention to that is happening real time, and we're seeing it unfold, and it has many, many different elements to it. And we've talked about CFIUS and investments in U.S. technology as but one dangling piece of that. It's fascinating to see it unfold.
Yeah, I have to say that whether you like it or not, there is pretty much the equivalent of a Cold War 2.0 emerging right now. And the terrestrial concerns behind that, whether they're human rights issues in China or Russian military buildup issues, are absolutely reflected in this booming commercial space enterprise that we're seeing going on. And when you look even what NASA's doing on the moon with the Artemis Accords, lining up 13 countries to participate in that, while China and Russia have announced they're going their own way and building their own moon base. This will be an interesting competition. Competition can be good, though. We got a lot done in space in the last Cold War to some extent because of that national energy surrounding that. But in many cases, it also impeded cooperation that probably could have done great things. Does anybody on the panel want to address that?
Well, I just love what's going on with America building together countries that share our views on and values on freedom. And so to me, and I've spoken on this before, I see the next lunar base to be the ultimate shining city on the hill, and that we should invite countries that share our views about freedom and liberty and respect for human life and human dignity to join us in establishing the first permanent human base on the moon. And when every kid in the world looks up there and says, there's people on the moon, they'll know they're free people. And to me, there's no greater message than that the future of humanity is freedom. And so I support that very strongly.
I'm with you there, Charles. Any other comments on what we're doing well there, what we could do better, where it's a benefit or an impediment as far as this geopolitical competition is concerned? All right. Nobody. Yes, Brad.
My one little thought is this. I heard you say that the the volume of rockets is going to increase. Now it's a number per year. It's going to become a number per month and a number per week, and then down to numbers per day. So I don't know if this comment makes sense to this group or not, but it seems like there's a lot of pollution coming off those rockets.
That's a
So
great question.
So if this is going to happen significantly, and now you can just, I'm just going to make this up because I know people that have done it, drive out into the Arizona desert, into some BLM land, and oh look, nobody's around. Let's launch something. I mean, the hobbyists are going to start to do this. I know people that have gone out into the desert and tested rockets. So anyway,
Sure.
There's the question. Thoughts
All
on
right.
that?
Well, good point. First of all, I serve on the ComStack Commercial Space Transportation Advisory Board at FAA's Office of Commercial Space Transportation. And the job of that office is to license and permit and regulate the launch of space vehicles as well as reentries. So you can't do that. You can't launch something into space without getting their permission. Even the student groups, like my students at USC's Rocket Propulsion Lab a few years ago, had the success of actually launching the first student-built rocket into space. The astro engineering department there at the Viterbi School of Engineering, amazing, but they had to get their permit to do that. All right. A couple of students that came out of there include Jordan and Tim, who founded Relativity Space, a real company, but they got to get permits to do that. Now, to your pollution point, this is a double-edged sword. The first thing I want to say is space is the solution to a lot of our environmental problems. We wouldn't know about the ozone hole that frankly threatened our environment and could have resulted in real catastrophe if we didn't have NASA data back in the 70s, right? We wouldn't know much about climate change and the arguments we have over what's happening there as far as anthropogenic versus natural contributions and what to do about it without the NASA and NOAA data. So space lets us think outside the box, and we're never going to solve our pollution problem inside the box. I've written a lot about that. And then secondly, I got to say, guess what? The rockets don't really pollute that much, the modern ones anyway. Elon's new rocket, what does it use for fuel, Charles?
It uses methane.
Natural gas, yeah, right.
Gas.
Yeah, it's a fairly clean vehicle, and we're all progressing that way. The SLS system that NASA will be launching uses hydrogen. Its pollution output is water vapor, basically, and so we don't have, in reality, a lot of serious issues there. People have also talked about the boosters dropping into the ocean, for instance. The good news is smart companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin are going to keep their boosters. But even if this stuff does fall in the ocean, there are 1 million shipwrecks on the bottom of the ocean already. And so adding some satellite pieces isn't going to create an issue there. What we want to make sure they do is they don't land in a city. Anybody else want to hit this pollution and environmental concern issue, though?
Well, I think there's beginning to be a lot of noise. What's really going on in the people pushing pollution is there's a fight going on between different companies, and they're using them, the National Environmental Protection Act to try to prevent competition to them. They really don't care about the pollution issue, but they're trying to get, trying to strangle their competitors from getting in the business. So it's there's a lot of false arguments going on right now. So you have to be careful to don't believe everything you see on the TV or read in the news. So we got to be careful about fake arguments being pointed along, and there's some of that going on right now with pollution arguments. It's many orders of magnitude lower than sources of pollution that come from the surface of the earth. So I don't think that what's going on in space is a source of pollution. And in the long term, the way we clean up pollution is by moving dirty industries off the earth. And the sun is the world's source of pure, 100% pure, clean energy. And the way we have ultimately, in the very long term, we're giving everybody a modern first world standard of living, but having clean energy is using the sun as the source of all that energy, and space will allow us to do that.
Yeah, and to be clear, if you put solar panels in space, you get a huge efficiency increase in the order of 7 times better than being on the Earth, and you can get power day and night to most everywhere on the planet, which solves the sustainability issues of quote sustainable energy systems. There's a great question here about. And I think this would be good for Brian, actually. Somebody said, how about creating AWS-like satellites, Amazon Web Services satellite platform, where users can lease satellites instead of each company launching their own? Brian, do you eventually see the software part of your business or the industry in general becoming a separate entity from the hardware part of the business, like it is in computing, and eventually you'll be able to buy bandwidth for imaging and communications on constellations and then run your own AI or communications or imaging networks against that?
Yeah, I think it's already going that way. I think, we've approached it that way where it's actually not about the satellites. It's about the data from the satellites or getting access to other data that people need to use to make decisions. So like in our case, we actually started with the software platform 7 years ago. And we bring in satellite data, we bring in IoT data, we bring in news and social media, all kinds of data feeds. In fact, today we're processing about 1 million observations a day of different types of data, collecting that in a data lake with 100,000 different sources. And we're processing that in real time. And it's why are we doing that is because most of the users don't want to do all that. They just want the answer. And they want to either, through an API, ask a satellite to take a picture or go get a piece of information that they need to use as part of their business process. So I think there's going to be all kinds of new business models. Greg, around, there'll be satellites as a service, there'll be space infrastructure as a service, we already see that now, like in ground networks that, we lease ground networks. I use Amazon for all my high performance computing. It's all going that way. And I think there'll be new layers of information systems and business models that are built around either platform as a service or infrastructure as a service. Or satellite as a service. But our strategy has always been, let's focus on what the customer's needs are in terms of timely and relevant information, and then figure out what the right sensor is we need to plug into the back end in order to provide that to them and take that problem away from them, which is, as I mentioned earlier, one of the bigger challenges to wider adoption for some of this data and analytics.
Right.
Let me add on.
Just quickly.
Let me add on.
I was just going to say.
Okay, Victor.
I was just going to say very quickly, Brian. I completely agree with you. And the military, a commercial company, in some ways they're similar, right? But back in World War II for the U.S. military, or the U-2 spy plane over the Bay of Pigs, Cuba, right? They developed. Hey, we have a mission. Let's develop the whole platform. Then they separated the platform from the payload. And then it's, okay, I want the video, I want the bit stream. Now it's just, hey, synthesize all the data, give me the answer. And the military is one example. There are many interesting applications which you've talked about in the commercial realm. It's the same thing, right? People are really interested in just give me the answer. And that's now available.
Yeah, going back to Greg, the example you brought up earlier on monitoring pipelines, the energy companies don't want to buy imagery. They want to buy a monitoring service for their pipelines, and they want to be alerted when there's potentially a security risk or a operational risk in a high occupancy location that they need to care about, or tied to meeting regulatory requirements for monitoring for safety. It's not about satellite imagery. It's about a pipeline monitoring service that they buy as a subscription. So you can just take that model across 30 different industries where it's not about that raw data. It's just about just send me the alert or the report or the information I need to run my business. And I just want to buy it. I don't want to build the whole thing to go make it happen.
All right, great question. I've got a question here for all the panelists. Somebody's asking, what opportunities or needs for students are there? So I can tell you that this industry is growing so quick that the pipeline of qualified people to fill the positions in these companies is drying up. Okay, and this is engineers, scientists, and managers who are space savvy and aware, finance people who understand a little bit about orbital dynamics. There's a huge need for this. I'm going to plug my own program, which I'm going to paste into the chat. I'm excited to be launching a program at the Thunderbird School of Global Management for ASU in January out of LA for training a new generation of executives and leaders in the commercial space industry. And so this is executive 1 year master's program in global management focused on space. At all levels, though, of the industry, I see this need. I see other schools I've spoken to. When I ended up being nominated as NASA CFO last year and the Senate never voted on my confirmation, I had the opportunity to talk to a lot of potential employers. And there are schools across the country and across the world that are interested in this. Panelists, what do you think these schools should be doing to deliver for industry as you see it? And Brian, you want to start out with that? Because I'm sure this is an issue for you.
I love this topic. I think, in our company, we have a need for aerospace engineers, high performance computing software engineers, data scientists that understand AI and machine learning, the business people and the product people that know how to put all that together. We're doing things like partnering with universities, giving them access to our data so they can use that in their AI and machine learning curriculums, and hopefully helping to build some of that talent that we can later hire. So I think this is it's a really important thing for our industry to make sure that we're producing students and talent that can come in around this. The other thing I'll say, I've gotten this question several times, and I've been asked, like, what would I encourage or students to be interested in looking into is and this is kind of near and dear to my heart personally, but to me, it's in the area of product management and systems engineering. And it's a discipline that takes years to learn of actually how to bring all this stuff together and make it work to run a business or to build a platform. And there's not enough of those types, coming out of the system that understand that kind of system level mentality. But I'll just say across the board, there's just demand for all kinds of disciplines, and I think there's a massive opportunity for universities to partner with companies like ours and others to help partner and seed the industry with real talent.
Fantastic. Anybody else on the panel want to address that issue of what students should be studying and what schools need to deliver? Victor, I think I saw your hand.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say very quickly, look, I'll go so far as to say I think the single greatest constraining resource to our ability to develop, new capabilities in space is you, the younger professionals on the call, right? And yes, engineering, software, absolutely fantastic, but it really doesn't matter, right? I mean, Tom was an engineer, he's gone down the legal route, right? I was an engineer, I've gone down the business route. You've got CEOs on the phone who are started probably in the engineering ranks, they're now running companies. It really doesn't matter what you choose to study. I think if you're passionate about being in the in the space domain and whatever it is, whether you're engineering, finance, HR, right? I mean, all companies need all those different capability sets. It really comes down to just your own personal motivation and being entrepreneurial and finding a way to kind of plug yourself in. And you should chase it because it is evolving rapidly and it needs every kind of talent. That's my personal view.
Right. I'll point out, I started out as a video game programmer and then had a series of tech startups before I switched to being what I think is the world's first space business professor. So excited to be doing this, but you can start out anywhere and end up where you want. And the space community and industry is super welcoming. Tom, do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't. I'll endorse Vic's perspective. I'll also say though, and you and Charles have some perspective on this too, and Vic as well. I'll put a plug out for public service. The committee, for example, it needs people from universities who understand science and physics and engineering, so that they're contributing to this risk analysis. The government needs people who understand these technologies and their applications, so that the government is doing a good job of quantifying risk and assessing risk and how things work. And if there's not that connection, that's a disadvantage for the government too.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We need people in the policy environment in DC who are doing the right thing, people working in agencies who do the right thing. And almost every government agency, even agriculture, now has an interest in what happens with space data. Charles, do you want to comment real quick on what the educational environment do?
The next generation is absolutely critical. So right now, Link has like 15 open positions on our website. You can go to our careers page if you're here and you're interested in getting in the space industry and see if something is relevant to you. But 80% of them are engineering, and it's all different types of engineering. But we also have other positions. But this is absolutely critical. It's the biggest constraint. I probably spend 1/3 of my time, in various forms of recruitment or interviewing, or, to build the company. So there's two types of resources to open space to humanity. One is money, and the other is people power, and you need both. And so if there's somebody out there and you're interested in the possibility of literally reaching out and touching the lives of billions directly by coming to work at Link, please go check out our website in the open positions.
Shameless recruiting. All right.
Yes.
Let me give each panelist a quick opportunity to wrap up in a minute or two at their closing thoughts. Brian, would you go first?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I guess I'll wrap up with where I started. I think we're just at an incredibly exciting time right now. With the convergence of what's going on in space, what's going on in sensors and AI and machine learning and high performance cloud computing. It's kind of mind blowing when you think about what is going to be coming here in the next several years. And I think the themes around where the barriers have come down in terms of access to space is going to drive just levels of innovation up there that we haven't even imagined. So I just, first of all, thanks for putting this panel together. I think this is just an amazing topic. Really proud to be part of where this industry is and where it's going. And I think for all the students out there and tech companies, it's just going to be a tremendous opportunity to do some really interesting things and change the way the world operates. So it's just at the beginning and at a major inflection point toward the future.
Right. Tom, closing thoughts?
I'll just say thank you. It's been a pleasure and privilege to be part of this group in this discussion. I agree, it's incredibly exciting, and it really is an industrial revolution that's going to transform the world.
Great. I'm glad to be there with you, Tom. Charles.
Well, thank you everybody for letting me be part of this. Just final thought for folks in our audience who would like to get into the space industry, that there's never been a better time to jump into the space industry. It's not going to be easy though. Persistence counts, and there's a saying that you should follow your passion, but in this case, you need to create your passion. You need to be persistent and stick to it. And persistence really does count. Passion does count. And you will develop yourself a place in this industry that is going to, be the future of humanity. So thank you for letting me be part of this.
Thank you, sir. And last but not least, Victor, you want to take it home here?
Yeah, no, look, I appreciate that. And again, I thank you. I think I agree with everything that's been said, and I'll close by saying I think probably as I look back on my career and kind of look forward, I think the most rewarding part of all of it is the people in the industry. You know, such as the people on the phone. I mean, you meet such fascinating, interesting people who are literally changing the lives of billions. It's just very rewarding to be around people such as yourselves. So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you to all my panelists, and thank you for the great questions from the attendees. Brad?
I just want to thank everyone for joining. I'm honored to be in this company, and everybody that joined, and everybody stayed on for a long time, which is great. I mean, these are really, really important topics, and I'd love to, see about potentially revisiting this and kind of, progress check in a year, let's say, and see kind of how we're all doing. But again, thank you all so much for your time and energy and everything you put in, and I wish everyone the best of luck. Excited to see the future.
All right. Thank you all. Ad
Cheers.
Astra.